Oh, hello. Welcome everyone to Diverse Voices, dedicated to sharing leadership stories with viewers. Hi, LinkedIn. Hi, YouTube. Today is Wednesday, and it's our first day of exploring coaching. That's why I'm super excited for my first guest, Jason Press. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Michael. Good to see you again.
Great to see you. For those of you who do not know Jason, for the past 5 years, he's been focused on coaching. He partners with entrepreneurs and corporate leaders to help them be more authentic and effective in their jobs and in their lives. And though for those of you who may be looking on screen saying, why are there two bald guys on the screen together? That's not the only thing Jason and I have in common. We actually have a background in branding, marketing, advertising, which I think is kind of neat that these strange worlds have collided in a cool way. How are things out there?
It's hot out here. I'm on the West Coast, 108 every day for the past month or so, and it's not looking like it's going to change any.
Yeah, that is something. Someone's going to have to rebrand climate change into maybe something a bit more attractive, because that sounds warm.
It's a dry heat.
Exactly. It doesn't look so humid. My hair doesn't curl, so it's perfect.
There you go.
I think, Jason, maybe you could share a little bit about how you pivoted from branding and marketing into coaching. I think that's kind of an interesting story, especially as we're talking about reinvention.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. I started my career back, God, I hate to date myself, but back in the 80s, working in a small advertising agency in Dallas, Texas, and moved to New York, which is kind of my spiritual home, back in the early 90s. And I was kind of a veteran of gray advertising in the sense I was there for 20 years. And during that time, I ran a branding and design division. So if everybody else was interested in making TV ads, my job was to run a division that was all about brand development. And then how do you take that brand and make it come alive across multiple touch points? So, for those of you who don't know anything about the advertising business, it tends to be a young man's game or young person's game. And after a few years, I decided, well, one is I wanted to get out of New York and come out west to Los Angeles and then ultimately Palm Springs. And I wanted to ask myself, how much longer did I want to stay in advertising? Or were there other opportunities? Was there more that I could do in my career and with my life? And somebody, well, it was in New York, so as it turns out, it was my therapist who said, have you thought about doing executive coaching? And I'm like, well, that sounds great. I have no idea what that is. And so, but I've mentored teams for many years. I've helped lead an organization. I understand what it is to nurture and grow talent. I'm sure I'd be good at that. And it was really interesting because I recognized that coaching is a very different skill from branding and marketing and advertising. And so I went back to school, which is something I never thought I would do. I went to the Hudson Institute of Coaching in Santa Barbara, California. I spent about a year practicing and learning how to be a good coach, and recognized there are a lot of differences with coaching and consulting. But I really welcomed this new role in addition to doing the brand development work I do. So I, for the longest time, kind of have a foot in two worlds, doing brand development work and doing executive coaching. But I couldn't be happier that I made the leap into something new.
Well, I think that the days of maybe our parents taking a role, taking a job directly out of college and following that journey and that path until retirement, whether that was a gold watch or something else, may be long gone. And that opportunity for reinvention, I think your perspective on this, especially having it been a lived experience, is something I'm really excited to talk about and really appreciate you sharing.
No, it's my pleasure. And yeah, it's been a really exciting and invigorating journey. A little scary at first. And I think I encounter a lot of clients who are looking to make career transitions or leaps, and they're a little bit nervous about it. But definitely, for me, it was definitely worth the leap. And I think one of the things I've been able to do is draw upon my experience in the brand development world and kind of borrow some of the learnings from there to help clients go about reinventing themselves in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming.
I'm really curious as we talk about reinvention and before we get into the way in which you pivot, have you seen a good number of your clients looking at this past year and a half as a reason to engage in reinvention as people are reevaluating their life choices?
Very much so. This is a time where people have recognized that the way it used to be is no longer what is now. And then as we get to ready to kind of enter into this next phase of the world reopening, whatever that looks like, do we really want to go back to where we were, or do we want to try something else? And so this is just one of those inflection points that happens probably once in a lifetime, where collectively everyone's looking at what it is they've been doing and saying, is there another way forward?
Yeah, especially as I'm always surprised when people use language as if things can return to normal and using the word normal, because after a year and a half, so many of us have developed new habits. I mean, it takes only 30 days or so to develop a new habit, create those new neural pathways. And many people haven't commuted in a year and a half. Maybe they have, but a good portion of people were stuck at home. If they were fortunate enough to work from home, developing an entirely new structure where their children were always around them. Maybe their spouses were in another room, or their 2 or 3 roommates were working around a table, and that became familiar. And that idea to return to what once was may not make sense for so many individuals.
I think that's exactly right. And it's interesting for me, this happened a few years ago when after moving to Los Angeles, I realized from New York that this isn't what I expected it to be. I didn't really like being in Los Angeles the same way that I thought I would. No offense to Los Angeles, it's a great city, but it didn't feel right for me. So one of the key factors for me in pursuing another career path was finding a role where I didn't need to be in a big city in an office. And so that pivot to working from home, at one point being people's only Zoom meetings that they had during the course of their day, to now one of many, was the transition that I made quite a few years ago, when I decided I wanted to spend time at the Palm Springs house, which is typically for weekends, and I wanted to move into it. And so I like to think of that transition as I live in the weekend house, and I've kind of let go of the big city for me, because I didn't want that commute. I didn't want LA traffic. I didn't want to be beholden to a job that I had to show up in a suit and tie every day. I wanted to be able to reinvent my career in terms of work for me. And now everyone, a lot of people are seeing there's a lot of merit to that.
Well, and the fact that you've been able to turn consulting into a full-time role and control your own environment, create your own environment that feels like home, and you're comfortable bridging that gap between home and work, certainly is a testament to your values and your perspective. It's going to be curious to see as people engage maybe in the gig economy, how they engage within their passions and find a career that suits them a little bit more. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about your philosophy about reinvention and how brand has shaped that ideal. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that'd be great. I was going to walk you through a kind of a process that I've borrowed from the branding world, and this is a process we call building brand muscles. And it's something I was using over 20 years ago with clients, where we recognize that the foundation for what a brand is and how one goes to market with a product or service is really comes from it can be done in a one-pager. And some people use the term, a brand house or a brand, a brand essence, or a messaging platform. I love the term brand muscles because it implies that we have some flexibility here. And so that we create these guiding principles, and we do it in such a way that we can be flexible depending on who we're talking to and what messages we're trying to convey. We can build off the different muscles, and they kind of all work together to move the body forward. So I recognize that when you, and these are kind of the starting point for building brand muscles. It starts with understanding who a brand is. And so if you could kind of substitute the word brand or product or service or company with the word me, or I, we start to ask some really good questions about, why am I doing this? What am I building here? How do I want to be thought of, and where this can go? And so I think a lot of people who are engaged in kind of developing their brand identity sort of stop here. There's so much inward focus about who you are and who you want to be, that you forget about the other components that go into putting your messaging out there and developing a strong foundation.
Well,
So
I think if we could just stop for a moment, for those people who are looking at themselves and trying to understand how brand is relevant, for anyone who's been paying attention in social media or inundated with social media, there's been a lot of talk of develop your own personal brand. And I love the way you're expressing, substitute the word brand for me, because it allows people to approach it and think of it as, how are you seen by others? Or how do you want to be seen? How do you want to be thought of? I think your question on screen is a great one, because we always forget that what is often said about a brand or an individual is, what do people say when you're not in the room? That truly is a brand and a reputation, and is a way that others can look at reframing perhaps their brand as we go through this process of yours.
Exactly, you nailed it. And it's interesting from my personal branding perspective. I always cringed at the term personal brand because I always viewed branding as something that happens in conference rooms, around companies, around products, around services, and it really wasn't about people. So what I really wanted, is I decided to lean into this personal branding area. Didn't want to turn this into a shallow exercise of packaging yourself up for something that isn't authentically who you are. So of course, the jumping off point is to kind of do that deep dive into, who am I? What am I about? Why am I doing this? Where do I want to go with this? That really ties to one's purpose and their values as the jumping off point. But then we start to kind of broaden the circle, so to speak, and look at the real world that's happening, looking outside of ourselves and saying, what does best in class look like? If I say I want to be an executive coach, what are some of the other executive coaches saying about themselves? What does best in class look like? And you're doing this for a couple of reasons. One is you want to see who you're up against and position yourself accordingly. But importantly, you also want to, see what you can borrow, what you can improve upon, and what you can replace. Meaning you never want to be a carbon copy of somebody else, but you do need to understand who you're competing against in the real world, and then who you're competing against in the aspirational world. And really narrow down what you are and what you're not. So for example, in the case of coaching, people think right away of something like a Tony Robbins, because he's such a strong motivational speaker. I looked at someone like that and I said, yep, he's great, but that's not at all what I aspire to be. I'm not somebody who wants to go on a lecture tour. I'm not somebody who wants to be a big speaker. I'm not somebody who's an author, but rather in fact, I'm the opposite of a speaker. I'm a listener. This little broadcast here notwithstanding, I'd much rather listen to people, ask questions, hear their stories, than hear myself talk. So really,
I'm really curious as you're talking about that. Why is it so valuable not only to know who you're up against, but to emulate something worth borrowing, improving, or replacing? How does that play into someone's path when you're coaching them?
Well, it really is. It's about understanding what the general landscape is out there, and particularly if one is looking to assume a new position or go after a job, you have to understand what others are saying, and then ask yourself, is this me, or what differentiates me from them? So it's a really good way of coming up with your unique selling proposition, your USP. What is your brand essence, and it cannot be copying somebody else. So it really is asking you to find the points of difference and to kind of separate yourself from the pack.
Thank you.
And by the way, some people are doing some really good things out there, and you may say, I want to do more of that. Well, in that case, it's not just saying, it's also walking the walk and talking the talk, learning how to do what it is that they do, if that's something that you truly want to do, which again could open up a whole new avenue of learning.
Sure. And if they're taking an approach that seems to work with you and correlates to your lived experiences, your stories are still going to be unique as you're discovering who you are. So
Exactly.
you're going to draw on something different nonetheless.
Exactly. The next component in this is to really understand who your target is, and so often I encounter people who are just saying, well, I just want a job, and they sit there and they go for, they respond to LinkedIn or job posts, and they just try to match what the job is asking for. And what I really encourage my clients to do is to get as narrow and as specific as possible about who are your ideal employers. Who are the, or in the case of if you're working for yourself, who is the ideal client or customer that I want, and really get very, very fine-tuned and very, very focused. And don't worry about making it too small a group. The reality is, that's just kind of the center of your target, and you can branch out from there. But if you just start with a scattershot approach of I want everybody, you're really not going to appeal to anyone. So it's really looking at who are your employers and your influencers? Who are those gatekeepers that perhaps stand in between you and the perfect job or the perfect client? Who are those people that I want to talk to, that I want to attract? And importantly, who can help me get there? So to really kind of broaden your circle, narrow your target, but broaden your circle of people that you speak to who can help you best reach and resonate with your target.
That's really interesting, because I think about the way others may perceive you, and by understanding them a little bit more, you can attune your message or your framework to what they may be seeking or receptive to.
Exactly. And I recognize there's a lot of potential coaching clients out there that aren't right for me, and that's okay. It's the key is I want to focus on the clients that I have the most potential to be successful with.
Okay, well, let's go to the fourth quadrant, to context, because really interesting how this plays out.
Yeah, this is what people forget about when they're doing this. They tend to be so focused on their own world. Who do they want to talk to? Who are they up against? And they miss some of the bigger, broader cultural contexts that's out there. Right now, we've got, COVID-19 has been a big slap in the face to everybody, to recognize that people want things differently now. There are cultural shifts and technology shifts that are happening in every industry. And so the question is that everybody should be asking themselves is, in addition to my industry or my skill set, what else is happening in the world that I need to be aware of, and how can I meet those demands so that I can be offering something that's unique that people really want for the future?
Well, and there's been a lot of talk that I think the careers that will exist 20 years from now, over half of them the internet was a thing, certainly was discoverable, but the jobs that exist today, I think when you look at even wellness coaching, 5 years ago, wellness coaching wasn't as much of a role as it is prevalent today, whether that's one-on-one or in group settings. So I think your extrapolation of trying to predict a little bit of the future and figure out where things are going can help serve you as well, because you don't want to necessarily be focused on helping, putting horseshoes on. I'm trying to think back way back for jobs that are no longer around.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. You need to be ready to pivot. So one example for me is, when being in Palm Springs, there's not a lot of businesses around here, and I thought, well, I need to get involved with the local business community. I need to find clients here, but if I take a broader view of the world and what's going on, I recognize that actually, I don't need clients locally. My clients, in fact, I have no clients locally right now. All my clients are in other places, and that's largely a result of the shifts in both how people have approached executive coaching, recognizing that it doesn't need to be an in-person thing, and that technology has allowed for people to find the best coaches no matter where they are.
Yeah, as long as you're able to find that connection, and you're able to go away from every conversation or getting a pat on the back, there's different ways of engaging with your coach.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about how that may play out for an individual?
How this I'm
How
sorry.
this model, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
How this
so no, so this model is kind of the jumping off point. This is the first step that I ask clients to do.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, obviously there are the other typical coaching um, kind of getting started in coaching, such as discovering what your strengths are. But then this, if somebody is specifically interested in building their brand muscles and making a transformation, I work with alongside them to kind of do this homework.
Hmm.
To kind of spend a lot of time on who they are, but then also encouraging them to do their homework about who the competition is, who the narrowest target is they can go after, and then kind of what's happening in the context. And so I encourage them to do a lot of homework, and this is the difference between branding and brand consulting and coaching. In my old role, I would do the work, right? I would present this to my client, then I'd go off and do a bunch of things and say, here's a solution. It doesn't work that way in coaching. It's the opposite. I trust that my client is going to do the homework that they need to do. And so given this framework, I work alongside them to help them fill in the boxes with the answers to these questions. And then once that's determined, I really encourage them to start building their brand muscles. So what's on the screen there is an example of a client that I work with named Jeff, who is in the global mobility space. And after going through the exercise of figuring out the previous circle of who he is as a brand, who he wants to talk to, what the competition looks like, and then also what's happening in the broader context, we came up with these series of, in his case it was 5, often it's 4, but these brand muscles, and we can skip through these really quickly because what's right for Jeff isn't right for everybody. But for him in the global mobility space, it's about the fact that he was innovative, that he's about clarity, that he's about collaboration, he's about results, and he's about doing this holistically. So often when somebody's in the process of making transition, they're in a big hurry to change their LinkedIn profile and write their resume and start with cover letters and start applying for jobs and getting their 30-second elevator speech down. These are all great things. They all need to happen. But I say, before we start trying to craft the perfect letter or the perfect resume, let's get these fundamentals down on a page where we're not worried about how these sentences flow, but rather, what is it I want to talk about every time that I'm up for an opportunity? And as I said before, they're muscles. So in some cases, going up for a role that really requires innovation, you maybe talk to that muscle a little bit more than the holistic muscle. But the long and the short of it is, this now becomes the blueprint or the script or the vocabulary for all the conversations that he'll have moving forward, and all the documentation he prepares to go after the roles that make sense for him.
Do you think that, moreover, when someone is reinventing themselves, there's obviously a lot of fear of the unknown? Does this help it make it a bit more familiar, where they're leveraging those lived experiences to push forward into this fork in the road?
Absolutely, and you raise another good point. Another part of this process is I encourage each one of my clients to develop a board of advisors. So people who have known them in the past, people who know the kind of roles they want to go after, what makes or the roles they want to step into, and to use them as a sounding board for anything that we come up with. So in the case of working with a client like Jeff, when we went through the original exercise of identifying kind of the considerations that he needed to take in place, had him as one of the steps in building the brand muscles, do a gut check with the people he knows and see how that sounded, and get some feedback from them about what he might be missing when he looks at the context, the competition, the target, and himself. And then because building these brand muscles wasn't a single coaching session exercise, it happened over time. As this evolved, I had him go back and check with each one of his board of advisors as to whether or not this resonates and feels right for him. So it is, to your point, yes, you definitely want to build in some tests in there to make sure that what you're saying is in fact true to who you are and will resonate with the community at large.
This is so interesting, and such a comprehensive way of finding who you are. I almost think of it like a nested doll, that there's another version of you inside, and there's an opportunity for you to unpackage them in one way, shape, or form. I'm going to pull this off screen so we can continue the conversation, because I'm really intrigued by the way in which people find themselves. Like, is it often the case that their shift to reinvention is like a minimal shift or a large shift or everything in between? Is there any sort of patterns you're starting to see?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for everybody. I think one of the key things that I try to remind my clients is you cannot walk away from who you were. In fact, quite the opposite. You need to find ways to leverage it. So when I say I do branding consulting work and I do executive coaching, to many people they'll be like, I don't even understand. How can you be both? Because to your point, as we started out the conversation, I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, or that I'm going to be in a single profession all my life and then graduate or retire with a gold watch, but rather, and I think Jenny Rogers talks about the notion of a portfolio career is kind of that interim step. I do a little bit of both. So 5 years ago, I was doing 90% brand development work and about 10% coaching. A few years back, I shifted to kind of a 50-50 model. And now I'm probably at the point where I'm ready to move into a 90-10 model in the other direction. But it's a gradual shift in my case, and always being true to the 30 years experience I had prior, and not trying to distance myself in that, but figure out how can I make that work for me in a way that's unique to me. So, I have another client who is in the process of, she just bought a business that specializes in cost reduction for businesses. And her background is that of being a CFO. And she was so quick to make the move to this new role and this new business that she kind of forgot that she was ever a CFO. And actually, there's a lot of need for partial CFOs now, and one could be the stepping stone to the next. So really to kind of get back in touch with who she was, not be in such a hurry to where she goes, and to kind of use one to take her to the next step. And that's been much more successful than her to completely shift gears and try to go down a different road where she hasn't quite got her footing yet.
Yeah, there's something really interesting about understanding there's a future version of yourself that may be quite different from where you are today. I always chuckle when I meet someone new, and at some point, because I'm American, the question is, what do you do for a living? Not the most interesting thing about them, but it can contextualize the conversation.
It's a very New York. It's a very New York thing. Yes.
It's a very New York thing.
And then what's your rent?
I don't want to know the rent. I don't want to know that I'm losing in that contest. But there is the opportunity to understand that when people ascribe to define themselves by their role, if they say they're a doctor, a lawyer, or even if they're a janitor, but that their experience can be long and really from one role to the next and cohesive in so many ways, it can also reduce the way in which others may enter into the conversation. But when you answer that question saying, well, I'm currently a coach, but I used to focus on branding, it unpackages a whole opportunity to be like, well, what was that like? How did that come about? And really invite people to participate in experiencing a little bit of your journey that you've now lived through.
Exactly. I think that's spot on. You want to invite people in conversation, and you want to intrigue them and tease them in a way that makes them want to learn more, and gives you an opportunity to tell your full story rather than just a glimpse at who you are.
Yeah, I've always found it interesting, knowing that I spent so many years in brand. When you're in advertising or you're selling something, the opportunity to pitch someone new can often be met with, well, how many automobile companies have you represented in your brand work? Mm-hmm. And some might answer that question, well, I've always worked in automobiles, so I really know your industry. But I also think what comes with that perspective is a limitation in scope. It's the only thing you know. But when you've brought together a journey of experiences that, if we're talking about advertising, if you serve in and auto and technology and hospitals, some of those different environments can inform the way you'll solve a problem in an industry that is so radically different from what they've seen before. It allows you to break the mold. I think for those who've coached for 30 years and coached the same way for so long, obviously there's a lot of establishment, there's a lot of leadership that shows up, but there's also a benefit for bringing different experiences to the table. And I love this, how this could apply for someone who's just looking to reinvent themselves and figure out, how do I stop showing up at the office, the same way for the past 20 years and explore something new about myself?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. A lot of people are asking themselves now. So I really appreciate you're giving me the opportunity to talk about this and to kind of verbalize a lot of the things that I'm typically working one-on-one with clients on. So this has been a real thrill for me to be able to share this with you and a broader audience. So really thank you for the opportunity today.
Truly, truly a pleasure. Thanks for sharing your perspective, your experiences, and I'll look forward to having more conversations with you offline.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.